The day the war changed forever, I was not there to see it. I was on a train, on a long train ride, long, sweaty, and exhausting, from Belgrade in Serbia all the way back to Italy, to my hometown of Bologna. It took me 1 day to get home, 24 hours. And when I got off the train, I couldn't wait. I just wanted to see my friends, see my family, and share with them my many adventures of a summer spent backpacking carefree in the Balkans. Great plan, right? But I got home, and nobody wanted to talk to me. All I could see in my friends and family's faces was fear and anxiety as they were watching the news and they were seeing a piece of the war crumble down, together with those twin towers in New York City. I got home on September 12th, 2001. What a day. It was a different world. It was a world where the need for security was much stronger and the sense of fear was everywhere. It was also a world of dichotomies, a world of contradiction. All of a sudden, it was us or them, the heroes or the terrorists. Freedom, security, human rights, safety, protection. I just couldn't fathom it. I couldn't understand. Yes, the state's first responsibility is to protect its citizens. Now, because I want to sound smart, I'm going to say it in Latin. Salus populi suprema lex. Smart, right? So it means the first and foremost responsibility of every state is to protect its citizens. Fair enough, it seemed to me, but the policies, the way a state protects its citizens is, to me, is just as important as the mission itself, because it tells us a lot. It tells us about its values. It tells us about the community where we want to live in. Security is not an absolute value. It's relative to all the other values we hold dear in our lives. Like every other public good, security is judged as a trade-off between what we gain to become secure and what we lose in the process. But that's then. Back then, a lot of years ago, I just didn't understand any of this. So I decided to put a pause on this security and human rights, put it on a shelf, and went to do something else. And that's how I got to Mexico. Yeah, exactly. Good choice. So I spent 4 years working in Chiapas in a human rights organization. All I was doing all day was simple. I was monitoring violence between paramilitary groups, the army, and the EZLN. 4 years spent working on conflict. And the more I worked on human rights in Chiapas, the more I learned about security. And what I learned was how people survive without it. Because the main lesson in Chiapas was that security and human rights are not opposite, they're complementary. We could not have dealt and we couldn't deal with the daily human rights violation without addressing the conflict in the background. That was the main cause of everything. Chiapas taught me something else. You can't live, you can't thrive, you can't be as a person if every night you go to sleep thinking your community is going to be attacked. You cannot be, you cannot develop as a person if you have no safety, no security. If the state is not there to protect you, quite the opposite. And you cannot be, you cannot develop, you cannot thrive if you know that tomorrow, if something bad happens to you or to your family, there is going to be no justice. This is not about security. It's about basic human development. How can we be the best we can be if we live in uncertainty, in conflict? It will eat up our sense of self, our self-esteem, our sense of self-worth. Many years ago, I spoke to an old lady in an indigenous community up in the north of Chiapas. And she told me, well, if I buy a coffin for my funeral, it's cheaper than going to the doctor. She saw that I was very shocked, but she wasn't joking. She told me, nobody sees us. Nobody knows we live. Nobody will know when we die. I didn't know what to tell her. I did not have an answer. But I would spend the next 10 years trying to find out. And that's what I'm doing. I spent the last 10 years studying conflict and how it affects civilians, and studying the cost of insecurity on ordinary people. To me, this is a key topic because it intersects human rights, security, and development. The first lesson, we need to start claiming back the words. We need to start taking back the word security. Security is a difficult word. It means something different to everybody. Different contexts, different societies, different times, give it a different meaning. But because something is hard to define, it doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. And because something is hard to define, it doesn't mean we should give someone else the power to define it for us. Today, in the news, in the politics, when you hear security, you hear one thing, and it's about the state. Protecting the state, its territorial integrity, its borders, its sovereignty. That's not enough. We need to add the human dimension. We need to see what makes communities, individuals, and societies safe. It's not the same. We need to start by seeing security as a basic right to physical and psychological safety, from conflict, from war, from violence, but also from crime or trafficking. We also have to see security as freedom from intimidation, freedom from oppression from the state. But that's also not enough. Security is also about basic human development. Can you be free amidst poverty? Can you be free amidst despair? No. So security should add a basic level of human development: shelter, food, health. That's what being secure is all about. Being secure is not a strong state, a strong army, and strong borders. It's about people living free from fear and in dignity. It's not just a word revolution. It's not just semantics. Words have meaning. They have powerful meaning. They define reality for us. They tell us how to see the world. Let me give you an example. I spent the past 10 years in the Middle East. And when the Arab Spring started, 2011, all the good analysts had been saying for the previous 3 years, there will be no revolution in the Middle East. It's impossible. These states are too strong. The authoritarian regimes, too solid. The coercive apparatus, too pervasive. Security is everywhere. These states have strong national security. They will not crumble. But guess what? They did crumble. And they crumbled because their human security was poor. Inequality, corruption, crisis of representation, rampant unemployment, and I can go on forever. So if we look at the right indicators, we can see society and we can predict reality a lot better. But that's not enough. Predicting societies, understanding, making good policies, yes, that's important. But ultimately, what I'm interested in, what I want to do is to take this definition and make it the basis for a new way of seeing politics and a new way of seeing how do we produce this security. So far, it's all about the military aspect. I think that's not enough. I think that will produce flawed and incomplete answers to our problems. Let me go back to the Middle East. Let's go to Syria now. As you know, Syria is the epicenter of the bloodiest civil war the world has seen in decades. And today there are two conversations on Syria. Conversation number one, security. What do we need to do? Prevent the war from spilling over to the rest of the region. And of course, we need to degrade, destroy, I don't remember what's the new catchphrase, but deal with ISIS, right? So that's the security conversation. In another room, in another building, there's people working on humanitarian issues. They are dealing with the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. They are dealing with 12 million people who need humanitarian assistance to survive. They are dealing with 8 million people internally displaced, and they are dealing with 4 million refugees. Now what happens is these two conversations never meet. And when resources are allocated and policy priorities are made, guess who gets most of the money? The security conversation, right? We need to change the way we see security. We need to realize that it's not acceptable to think that 13 million, 13 million children out of school in the Middle East today, 3 million in Syria, are any less of a threat than ISIS. We cannot let it be that dealing with the security crisis, it's more important than dealing with the long-term generational effect of this refugee crisis that is washing away the region. Redefining security is not about words, it's about getting our priorities straight. If we get our priorities straight, we can close that gap between us and them, between freedom and security, between human rights and protection. That's important, because one day, in my dreams, I'm going back to talk to that lady, and one day I will have an answer for her. And the answer is simple. It's right in front of us. The answer is, yes, we do know you live. Yes, we do know your struggles. Yes, we see you, because your life matters, because every life matters. Thank you.